Margaret Patterson was doing her evening shopping at the small grocery store when she heard it, a tiny, desperate meowing coming from behind the dumpster in the alley. At 72 years old, she had been a widow for 8 years and lived alone in her cozy cottage with nothing but her garden and her memories for company. But that pitiful cry broke her heart instantly. Behind the garbage bins, soaking wet from the afternoon rain and no bigger than her hand, was the tiniest kitten she had ever seen. Its fur was a beautiful orange with black stripes, and its blue eyes looked up at her with such trust that Margaret knew immediately she couldn't walk away. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered, gently scooping up the shivering baby. "Don't worry, sweetie. Grandma Margaret is going to take good care of you." Margaret had always been good with animals, having raised 3 cats during her 40-year marriage to Harold. She set up a cozy bed for the kitten in a shoebox lined with soft towels, fed him warm milk with an eyedropper, and watched him sleep peacefully for the first time in what must have been days. She decided to call him Whiskers, after the most prominent feature on his tiny face. From the very beginning, Whiskers was different from any kitten Margaret had ever known. He grew at an astonishing rate, what seemed like inches every week. By the time he was 2 months old, he was already the size of a full-grown house cat, but his appetite was enormous. He would devour an entire can of cat food in minutes and still look hungry. His paws were unusually large, almost comically so, and his tail was thick and powerful. Margaret attributed these quirks to him being a special breed or perhaps having some wild cat ancestry. She loved watching him play in her garden, chasing butterflies and pouncing on leaves with an intensity that was both adorable and slightly unnerving. His play was different too, more aggressive, more predatory than the gentle cats she remembered. But he was always gentle with her, purring loudly when she scratched behind his ears and following her around the house like a devoted shadow. The neighbors began to take notice around the 3-month mark. Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned that Whiskers looked awfully big for such a young cat, and the mailman started leaving packages on the porch instead of coming to the door after Whiskers had approached him with what could only be described as a stalking gait. By 4 months, Margaret had to admit something was very unusual about her pet. Whiskers now weighed nearly 40 pounds and stood almost 2 feet tall at his shoulders. His orange and black stripes had become incredibly vivid and defined, creating a pattern that was breathtakingly beautiful but somehow seemed too perfect for a regular house cat. His teeth were becoming impressively sharp, and sometimes, instead of meowing, he would make a sound that resembled a low rumble or growl. Margaret tried to dismiss her growing concerns. She had invested so much love in this animal, and he clearly adored her in return. Every morning, he would nuzzle against her legs as she prepared breakfast, and every evening he would curl up beside her chair as she watched television, though curl up was becoming increasingly difficult as he took up more and more space. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. Margaret had let Whiskers out into the fenced backyard while she prepared his breakfast, which now consisted of 3 cans of cat food, a bowl of dry kibble, and sometimes leftover chicken from her own meals. She heard a commotion outside and rushed to the window to see Whiskers engaged in what she could only describe as a hunt. A rabbit had somehow gotten into her garden, and Whiskers was stalking it with movements that were fluid, powerful, and absolutely terrifying in their precision. This wasn't the clumsy pouncing of a house cat. This was the calculated approach of a born predator. When he finally struck, the speed and power were unlike anything Margaret had ever witnessed. The rabbit didn't stand a chance. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching in stunned silence as Whiskers carried his prey to a shaded spot under her rose bushes. The way he moved, the way he held his massive head, the sheer size of him. It suddenly all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Her sweet little Whiskers wasn't a house cat at all. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been the town's veterinarian for 25 years, and she thought she had seen everything. But when Margaret Patterson called frantically requesting an immediate appointment for her cat and mentioned she would need to bring him in a dog carrier because he's gotten quite large, Dr. Reeves was unprepared for what walked through her door. Margaret struggled with the oversized pet carrier, and when she finally managed to coax Whiskers out, Dr. Reeves felt her knees go weak. Standing before her was unmistakably a juvenile tiger, probably around 5 months old, and already weighing close to 50 pounds. His orange coat with distinctive black stripes was glossy and healthy, his amber eyes alert and intelligent, and his presence filled the small examination room with an aura of wild power that no house cat could ever possess. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Reeves said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where exactly did you say you found this animal?" Margaret was stroking Whisker's head nervously, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Behind the grocery store about 4 months ago. He was just a tiny baby, no bigger than my hand. I know he's gotten large, but he's still my sweet little Whiskers. He's never hurt me, never even scratched me." Dr. Reeves watched in amazement as the young tiger rubbed against Margaret's leg and emitted a deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through the floor. The bond between them was clearly genuine and profound, but the situation was far more complex and dangerous than the elderly woman could possibly understand. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Dr. Reeves said gently. "Whiskers isn't a house cat. He's a tiger cub, a real tiger. I don't know how he ended up behind that grocery store, but somehow you've been raising a wild animal that could grow to weigh over 400 pounds. Margaret's face went pale, but her hand never stopped petting Whisker's massive head. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He's been living in my house, sleeping on my couch, eating cat food." "Tigers are incredibly adaptable when they're young," Dr. Reeves explained. "He bonded with you as his mother figure, which is why he's been so gentle and affectionate. But Margaret, as he continues to grow and mature, his natural instincts are going to become stronger. What you saw with that rabbit is just the beginning." The examination revealed that Whiskers was in perfect health, strong, well-fed, and clearly well-loved. But Dr. Reeves also had to explain some harsh realities. Tigers were illegal to own as private pets in their state. Wildlife authorities would have to be contacted, and while Whiskers was currently manageable, he would soon reach a size and strength level that could be lethal, even if he didn't mean to harm anyone. Margaret sat in stunned silence, processing information that shattered her understanding of the past 4 months. The little creature she had rescued and loved was one of the most powerful predators on Earth, and keeping him was not only illegal, but potentially fatal. "What happens to him?" she asked finally, her voice breaking. Dr. Reeves had already been making phone calls. "There's a big cat sanctuary about 3 hours north of here. They specialize in caring for tigers, lions, and other large cats that can't be returned to the wild. The director, Dr. Michael Santos, is actually on his way here now." Will they put him down?" "No, absolutely not. Whiskers is young, healthy, and has clearly been well socialized. Sanctuaries like this exist specifically to provide permanent homes for animals like him. But Margaret, you have to understand. Once he goes there, you won't be able to take him home. Tigers aren't pets, no matter how much love exists between you." As if sensing the gravity of the conversation, Whiskers looked up at Margaret with those intelligent amber eyes and let out a soft chuff, a sound she now realized was distinctly tiger-like. Her heart was breaking, but she was beginning to understand that keeping him would be selfish and dangerous for both of them. Dr. Michael Santos arrived within 3 hours, accompanied by a team of wildlife specialists and a specially designed transport vehicle. Margaret had expected to see someone cold and clinical, but Dr. Santos was a gentle man in his 50s who immediately understood the emotional complexity of the situation. "Mrs. Patterson," he said kindly, watching as Whiskers maintained his protective position next to Margaret's chair. "What you've done is remarkable. Raising a tiger cub requires incredible dedication, and the fact that he's so healthy and well-adjusted is a testament to your care." Margaret looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I just loved him. I didn't know what he was. I just knew he needed help." Dr. Santos knelt down and slowly extended his hand toward Whiskers. The young tiger sniffed cautiously, then allowed the stranger to pet his massive head. "He trusts you completely," Dr. Santos observed. "That's created an incredibly strong foundation for his development. But Margaret, I need to ask you something important. Would you be interested in staying involved in Whiskers' care?" Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Our sanctuary has a volunteer program for people who want to help care for the animals. We're always looking for dedicated individuals who understand these magnificent creatures. Whiskers is going to need consistency and familiar faces as he adjusts to his new home. Having you visit regularly could make his transition much easier. The possibility of not losing Whiskers completely gave Margaret hope she hadn't dared to feel. But first, she had to face the hardest moment of her life, watching him leave her home. The transport process was carefully orchestrated. Tomao, Santos and his team used a combination of gentle persuasion and Margaret's calming presence to guide Whiskers into the specialized travel enclosure. The young tiger was clearly confused and anxious about leaving his territory, but Margaret's voice kept him calm. "It's okay, baby," she whispered through the bars of his temporary cage. "Mama's going to come see you real soon, I promise." As the transport vehicle pulled away from her cottage, Margaret stood in her empty garden and cried harder than she had since Harold's funeral. Her house felt enormous and silent, without the sound of massive paws padding across her floors and the rumbling purr that had become the soundtrack of her daily life. 2 weeks later, Margaret made her first visit to the Wild Haven Sanctuary. She had spent the intervening time reading everything she could find about tigers, their behavior, their needs, and their conservation status. She learned that there were fewer than 4,000 tigers left in the wild worldwide, making each individual incredibly precious. When she arrived at the sanctuary, Dr. Santos personally gave her a tour of the facilities. The enclosures were enormous, multi-acre spaces with trees, pools, and varied terrain that allowed the cats to express their natural behaviors. It was nothing like the cramped cages she had feared. "Where is he?" Margaret asked anxiously. Dr. Santos led her to a beautiful habitat surrounded by reinforced fencing. "Whiskers!" he called out, using a special call that the tigers had learned to associate with positive interactions. Margaret gasped when she saw him. In just 2 weeks, Whiskers had grown noticeably larger and had developed an even more magnificent coat. But the moment he saw Margaret, his entire demeanor changed. He bounded toward the fence with unmistakable joy, chuffing and purring so loudly that other visitors stopped to stare. "My goodness," Margaret whispered, reaching through the fence to pet his massive head. "Look how big you've gotten, baby." Dr. Santos watched the reunion with amazement. "I've never seen him this animated with anyone else." "Margaret, I have a proposition for you. We're starting a new program where dedicated volunteers can actually help with the daily care of specific animals. It would involve training, certification, and a significant time commitment, but it would allow you to maintain a real relationship with Whiskers." Over the following months, Margaret threw herself into learning everything about tiger care. She studied their dietary needs, their social behaviors, and their medical requirements. She learned to prepare their specialized meals, to recognize signs of health problems, and to understand their complex communication systems. More importantly, she became Whiskers' primary human companion. Every Tuesday and Friday, she would spend the entire day at the sanctuary, helping with his care and enrichment activities. She watched him grow from a 50-pound juvenile into a magnificent 200-pound adult male tiger with a personality that remained gentle and affectionate toward her while displaying all the power and majesty of his species. The sanctuary began using Margaret and Whiskers as ambassadors for tiger conservation. School groups would visit to learn about these incredible animals, and Margaret would tell the story of how a tiny kitten behind a dumpster had opened her eyes to the wonder and fragility of wildlife. "I thought I was saving him," Margaret would tell the wide-eyed children who came to visit, "but really, he saved me. He gave me a purpose I never knew I needed and taught me that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to." On Margaret's 75th birthday, 3 years after finding Whiskers, the sanctuary held a special celebration. Whiskers, now a fully mature tiger weighing nearly 300 pounds, participated in the festivities with the calm dignity of a true ambassador animal. He had never forgotten the woman who had rescued him as a helpless cub, and their bond remained as strong as ever. Dr. Santos presented Margaret with a special award recognizing her contributions to tiger conservation and education. "Margaret Patterson," he announced to the gathered crowd of volunteers and visitors, "has shown us that love and dedication can bridge any gap between species. Her commitment to Whiskers has not only given him the best possible life, but has helped educate thousands of people about the importance of protecting these magnificent animals. Margaret stood beside Whisker's enclosure, her hand resting on the fence as he pressed his massive head against her palm. She thought back to that rainy evening when she had heard a tiny cry for help behind a grocery store dumpster. She had expected to save a kitten, but instead, she had discovered her life's true calling. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Margaret said to the audience, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "I never had children of my own. Harold and I tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. I thought that part of my life was over when I lost him. But then this little orange and black baby showed up in my life, and suddenly I understood that family isn't always what you expect it to be." Whiskers let out a deep, contented chuff that resonated through the sanctuary grounds. He had grown from a helpless infant into one of nature's most perfect predators, but the love and trust in his amber eyes when he looked at Margaret remained unchanged. As the celebration wound down and visitors began to leave, Margaret lingered by Whisker's habitat as she always did. The setting sun cast golden light through the trees, illuminating his magnificent coat in shades of fire and shadow. "Thank you, baby," she whispered to him, as she had countless times before. "Thank you for teaching me that the most extraordinary love stories sometimes start in the most ordinary places." Whiskers responded with a gentle rumble, settling down near the fence where Margaret could continue to pet his massive head. They remained there together as darkness fell, a 75-year-old grandmother and her 300-pound kitten, proving that some bonds transcend species, circumstance, and all logical explanation. Margaret had found a tiny creature that needed saving, but in the end, they had saved each other. Her empty house had been filled with purpose, and his uncertain future had been secured with love. It was, she reflected, the most beautiful surprise of her entire life, and it had all started with the courage to pick up a crying baby and whisper, "Don't worry, sweetie. Grandma's going to take good care of you." Some promises, she learned, are bigger than we ever imagined when we make them. Subscribe for more stories.